I have one or two other questions for you. So it's a really easy to read book in many ways. So it's really, I think it's written beautifully, and it reads as though you just kind of wrote it while you were there, when you came back. I mean, how did you find the writing of it? This is your first book, I think. So how did you find writing it? Was it straightforward? Was it diary form that you've just expanded, or how was the process?
Terrifying, I think, is the simple way of the process. And partly I got a kind of contract, which was very exciting, to write the book. And the contract said, if you don't deliver the book in a year, we'll cancel the contract. So I had this kind of very definite deadline. And the hardest thing I found about it was starting, because I think I was sort of, I was a bit scared of all those questions around whose story is it, and do I, am I entitled to tell the story, and those kind of things. But I think I also had a sort of fantasy version of the book I could write. And that initially, when you're faced with that kind of blank page, there was just a kind of, well, there's no way I can get from here to that fantasy I have over there. And so the slowest part of the book was starting. But actually what I found was, once I got over that and accepted it wouldn't be this ideal fantasy book, once I just got words on the page and I had something that I could play around with and edit and fit together, I found, that then it became actually a really pleasurable experience. And one of the pleasures in it was finding kind of connections between things that I hadn't expected. So I always remember, quite late in the writing process, there's a chapter that's now called My Country's Friend, which is a line from Julius Caesar. And basically it was almost the last chapter I wrote, although it's not the last chapter in the book. And it was basically, at that point, it was the kind of spare parts that hadn't fitted into other chapters. And I was sort of thinking, do I need to abandon this? Maybe this one's not going to come together. And I remember kind of lying on the floor of the room that I was writing in at that point, talking out loud to myself the different bits that I had and trying to see how they were connected. And eventually I just sort of overheard myself realizing that one of the things in this was this episode in Julius Caesar that gives the chapter the title, which is where someone lies to a soldier about their identity. And another episode I had in that book was where I was with a Palestinian friend, and they lied when we encountered a soldier about who they were. They pretended to be British for reasons that I explain in the book. And that connection just hadn't occurred to me, but it was obviously going on somewhere, kind of unconsciously. And those sorts of triggers were how I started to find that the material I was writing about what happened in the classroom and what happened outside it started to kind of fit together thematically.
That's really great. That's really helpful and really interesting as well, the example. But I think for our students, that's really helpful to know that you find writing terrifying, and I find writing terrifying. I might not use that word, and I think sometimes it takes the form of a kind of procrastination, or we kind of don't admit to ourselves it's terrifying. We just find, actually the washing up really needs doing rather than writing or whatever. So it can have a kind of experience that's quite boring, but actually it is terror writing. And maybe for like a 1,000, 2,000 word essay, I think many of our students can procrastinate, and they can write that essay the night before it's due in or the week before, and it's the deadline can kind of force us out of procrastination, as indeed your deadline for your contract helped encourage you out of yours. But I think when students are doing, so for the course that your book's on, which is called World Literature, there's a 4,000 word essay at the end, this kind of project. And that's the kind of thing I think where students are encouraged to write slowly, to do that kind of process that you've been talking about. Maybe not lying on the floor is not a necessary part of that, but that kind of writing in bits and pieces, and maybe writing experimentally. They might have sections or ideas that they can't quite work out why they're writing about them, what they're doing. So I think that the sense in which this writing is very much a process, even for books that seem really polished and well thought through, that they happen on the ground, they happen during writing, they happen during the process. That's really useful.
Yeah, I think it's also, I think it's really important for students to think of essay writing as a creative process. I think sometimes we think if you're writing a novel, that's creative. If you're writing an essay, it's kind of not. But actually, if you can recover that sense of it as creative, you can also remember that it should be pleasurable. That this should be kind of experimenting and creating something new. And I think it is also about not trying to kind of create the perfect object or the perfect essay. So I read a study once someone did of two adult education classes that were both sort of beginners doing kind of sculpting, and they deliberately gave these two classes different instructions. So one of them, they said, you're going to be judged at the end of the 10 weeks, whatever it was, on the number of sculptures that you've produced. And the other, they said, we're going to judge you on this kind of one object that you produce at the end. And that basically what happened to the people who told they were doing one object is, some of them just kind of went to pieces because it was too much pressure. And they did, not the sculpture. And but others also just really struggled with it and put it off to the last minute and didn't produce something they were happy with. Whereas the students who were just told to produce volume actually tended to produce much higher quality work. And I think there's something in that for us in terms of writing, that actually a lot of writing is just going at it and keeping on doing it and revising it and having another go at it. And that if you can get into that rather than trying to produce your one perfect essay at the end of it, there's more pleasure in it, but also you may find that the quality of what you have at the end is also higher.
Yeah, I totally agree with all of that. Yeah, I think just learning to enjoy writing and letting yourself enjoy it, yeah, is really important.